Masechet Sotah, Daf Chaf Vav. The last thing we mentioned was the opinion of Rav Nachman that regarding an Ailonit, she cannot drink. Why? Because the pasuk says "V'nizre'a zara," that if Sotah should drink and she is found and she is innocent, then she will bear seed. And an Ailonit, biologically, as someone who's never developed fully biologically as a woman, has some manly features, and therefore biologically can never become pregnant, and therefore it is excluded from the Sotah drinking ritual. And Rav Nachman says that's true according to everyone, even Rabbi Elazar, who says that Sotah could work if, let's say, an elderly woman who right now happens to be, she can no longer get pregnant, but once upon a time she was able to get pregnant. So someone who biologically can get pregnant, just has a disease or is elderly, according to Rabbi Elazar, that's a permitted marriage, because the husband, if he didn't already fulfill Perut Vu, he could always marry another woman. So Rabbi Elazar said that's fine. They can drink, but everyone agrees Ailonit cannot drink because there is no possibility biologically of her ever carrying seed. Okay, so that was the opinion of Rav Nachman, and now we're going to challenge it from a long baraita. This baraita, only the relevant part is going to be all the way at the end, that says an Ailonit can drink. That'll be the question. But we're going to quote the entire baraita first, then we're going to analyze some of the baraita. And when we do that, we're going to go back and analyze the next sections of the Mishnah. So here's the Baraita. Metibe. Hamkanela rusato ul shomeret yavam. Shelo. Imad shelo kenasa nistera lo shota velo notelet ketubata. A lot of this is some summary and elaboration on the Mishnah. A man who gives a warning and makes a sotah his arusa or shomeret yavam. So they're not yet fully married. And let's say she violates the warning and she secludes with that other man before they're married, right? Before either nisuin or before yibum, she does not drink, and she also does not collect her ketubah, because the sotah drinking only applies to when someone who's fully married, based on the pasukim that we've seen. מעוברת חברו ומנקת חברו לא שותות ולא נוטלות כתובה דברי רבי מאיר. If the wife, someone marries someone and she had already been pregnant from a previous marriage, now he's supposed to wait until she gives birth, or she's nursing, and again he's supposed to wait 24 months since for the baby to finish nursing, otherwise it will endanger either the pregnancy or endanger the baby, who will not have sufficient milk. Now they're supposed to wait, and if they don't wait and they get married anyway, and he makes his wife a sotah, she does not drink, again because we do not want them to we do not want them to come back and be remarried, because the marriage is problematic, according to the Rabbi Meir, right? So therefore, she loses her ketubah. She does not drink because the marriage is not allowed anyway. Why? Rabbi Meir was very strict about this, and he says a man may not marry a woman who is already pregnant from another guy, or who is nursing a child from a previous husband. And if she does get married within the 24 months, then they should get divorced, and they are never allowed to remarry, right? As a penalty, never allowed to remarry even after the 24 months. That was Rabbi Meir, and so therefore, since this marriage is prohibited and permanently prohibited, we don't want her to drink. We want them to get divorced. Hachamim, however, said they can't be married now, but he can divorce her. And when after 24 months of the baby nursing, then they can remarry. So you see, Hachamim, since they are more lenient in general in this law, so they're also more lenient regarding the sotah, even though they're not allowed to be together now, but they could be together later. So therefore, Hachamim say she can drink in that case. Veharobe, next case, Shenasa akara uzkena ve'en lo isha ubanim me'ikara, lo shota ve'lo notelet ketubah. If a young man who we presume is didn't have children yet, but he's able to have children, and he marries someone who is barren or an older woman who can no longer have children, and he doesn't have children yet. So this is a problematic marriage because we don't want him to be married. We want him to marry someone who can bear children for him so he can have do peru urvu. So therefore she does not drink and she does not get her ketubah. We want this marriage to end. Rabbi Elazar Omer Yachol Lisa Acheret Liftot V'Bot Hemena says no, not so, right? If he can afford it, and he can go marry a second wife, and he can have children from that wife. So it's not prohibited in and of itself for him to marry this akara and zikena, and therefore she can drink. Right? There's no absolute need to end the marriage as long as he finds a way to fulfill pru'urvu with another wife. Avalam kanela rusato. Okay, notice that it doesn't mention Ailonit here in this machloket. So we're going to get to Ailonit in a minute. אבל מקנה לארוסתו שמרת יבם שלו ומי שכנסה הנסתרה או שותה או לא נוטלת כתובה. Now this aval is going back to the first case in the Braita. Now this is a contrast. If someone warned his arusa or shemeret yavam, and then after the nisuin or after the yibum, then she's secluded. That's a different case. Up above, it was when she's secluded before they were married. Then she doesn't drink. But here is when she's secluded after they were fully married. Then the warning that they had before comes into effect. She is a sotah, and this seclusion happened now that they're married. So now she's a full sotah, and she can choose, like a regular case of sotah, either to drink or to lose her ketubah. And unlike the case before, where a man marries a woman who is pregnant from a previous wife, or nursing a child from pregnant from a previous husband, or nursing a child from a previous husband, and that was the case before. But now we're talking about a case where a man is married to a woman, and she is pregnant from him, or nursing his own child, regular marriage. And during that time, he makes her a sotah. She can drink. And she chooses, like a regular sotah, to drink or lose her ketubah. What's the chidush here? Why would you think otherwise? This is just a regular marriage. Well, the problem here is that, let's say she's pregnant and she's guilty, and now she's going to blow up, and that will cause the loss of the child as well. Which you might say, well, that's not fair. Maybe just wait until she gives birth so that this child doesn't die. But no, we do not wait. This would be the same as capital punishment. If a pregnant woman, commits some crime that deserves capital punishment, we do not wait for her to give birth, right? But we give her actually capital punishment even while she's pregnant. So this would be all the more so in this case. And the young man who married akara or zekena, a woman who's barren or older and can no longer have children, but he already has children beforehand, right? He already was married. So then the marriage that he has now is totally permitted according to everybody, right? Chachamim, to be meir, you're allowed to, a man who already did peru'urvu is allowed to marry a woman just for companionship, not only for children. So therefore, that's a regular marriage, and she can drink. She can choose to drink or lose her ketubah. The Braita continues. Eshet mamzer lemamzer, eshet natin lenatin, eshet ger, ve'eved meshuchrar, ve'ailonit, o shota o lo notelet ketubah. And so the end of the Braita is, let's say you have a mamzer who's married to someone who a mamzer is allowed to marry. Let's say she is a mamzeret, for example, right? Or other people that a mamzer is allowed to marry. And so this is a perfectly legitimate marriage, right? Or a natin, one of the descendants of the Givonim, who marries someone who natinim are permitted to marry. Or if someone is a convert. And so this convert to Judaism, regular full convert, marries a woman, he can make her a sotah. Or if he was a Eved Kana'ani who was freed, which is the same as a convert, These are all regular, proper marriages. The Gemara will discuss, like, what's the chidush, right? These are just regular Jews once they fully converted. So why would we think that maybe she wouldn't be a sotah? But anyway, the Baraita is saying they all can make their wives regular sotot, and they would have to drink. And also an ailonit, right? A man is married to an ailonit, and he makes her a sotah. She can choose to drink or to collect a ketubah like a regular woman. So here, katanemiha ailonit tiyubte de Rav Nachman. So we zero in on the challenge. Right here at the end, it mentions ailonit can drink. So it means, according to someone, at least it'd be Elazar. In fact, an ailonit can drink, and this challenges Rav Nachman, who said that according to everyone, an ailonit cannot drink. So we answer, Amalach Rav Nachman, Tana ehi ve'ana damreki hai Tana. Rav Nachman says, actually, there's a machloket Tanaim about whether anyone says ailonit can drink or not. According to the Braita you just quoted, yes, you're right. According to the Bi'alazar there, an ailonit can, at least according to Bi'alazar. The end of the Braita here doesn't say who, but earlier in the Braita it said only the Bi'alazar would allow an elder woman or a kara to drink. So it could be that this is also only the Bi'alazar, even though it doesn't specify. But anyway, according to this, at least someone can drink. But I have another Braita, de Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Ailonit lo shota velo notelet ketubah, shene'emar v'niketa v'nizra'a zara, mi shedarka lehazriya, yas'a zo she'en darka lehazriya. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar teaches that an ailonit does not drink, and she also does not get her ketubah, because the pasuk says that if she is innocent and cleared, then she will get pregnant. So only someone who could possibly conceive a child can drink. That excludes an ailonit because she has no possibility, fundamentally, biologically, to bear seed. And so that's therefore she's fundamentally excluded. And so Rav Nachman says, I follow this Tana, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and according to him, this is a biblical exclusion, and I think that everyone would agree with this derivation. Okay, now we ask, V'Rabbanan, the sages of the long Mishnah, the long Baraita, that said an ailonit does drink, Hi, v'nikena v'nizre'a zara, my avdile, what are they going to do with this pasuk? If it doesn't exclude an ailonit, because an ailonit can drink according to them, so what is it excluding? Excluding miba'elehu lichdetanya v'niketa v'nizre'a zara sh'im hayta akara nifkedet dibre Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says this teaches that even if she had been barren before, now miraculously she will be cured. In other words, if you have a barren woman who becomes a sotah, and then she drinks, and she's innocent, not only will she not blow up, she actually will be cured of her barrenness, and be able to get pregnant, according to Rabbi Akiva. אמר לרבי ישמעאל, אם כן, יסתרו כל ההכרות ויפקדו, וזו הואיל ולא נסתרה הפסידה. Rabbi Ishmael says that doesn't make sense. Now you have, if it was true, you would have a cure for all barrenness. Anyone who is barren, they should go tell their husband, listen, go warn me on purpose, and then she'll go and seclude herself with that guy on purpose, and she'll go and drink. She'll seclude but not sin with the person, and then if she's innocent, she'll drink and she'll get cured. And so this is a cure for all, and that's if they actually have to go and do something wrong and seclude themselves. Whereas someone who doesn't seclude herself at all, she should lose out and not get this blessing. It doesn't make sense to reward someone who had to be warned and secluded, and not give that same benefit to a woman who was perfectly innocent and never even secluded herself. So It doesn't make sense to reward someone for bad behavior, even if they're innocent of sin. She didn't have relations with anyone. Still, she's secluded. So, imken matamod lomar. So Rabbi Shmuel says, I disagree with Rabbi Akiva. Rather, he says, v'niketa v'nizra azara. What does the pasuk teach? She'im hayta yoledet besar, yoledet berevach nekevot, yoledet zecharim kesarim, yoledet arukim, shechorim, yoledet levanim. It means that it's talking about someone who can give birth, and she was going to give birth, and now she still will give birth, but it'll be in a better way. If she would have had a lot of pain, now she will get a blessing and she will give birth without pain. If she was going to have a girl, then she will have a boy. Right? May your next child be a masculine child. Not that having girls are anything negative about that, but especially in those days, economically, it was good to have a boy, because a boy will continue working on the farm, and that's someone's pension. Whereas a girl, she just gets married and leaves her elderly parents. If the kid was going to be short, now they'll be tall. And if it was dark, then it'll be light. You shouldn't take this as being too racist. We're not actually talking about different races. It's all Middle Eastern children. Just they preferred slightly lighter skin than darker skin. All right. And so that's according to the Ishmael. They'll just get a blessing, but it's not going to cure barrenness. Now the Braita. Now we figured that out. That's the reason we brought the Braita, to answer to question of Nachman, and he answered it from a different Braita. But since we mentioned the Braita, let's analyze a few other statements in it. Eshet mamzer le mamzer. If you have a mamzer married to a mamzeret, so it's a perfectly legitimate marriage, and he can make her a Sotah, and then she would drink. And the Braita says that she can drink. So we ask, Peshita, isn't that obvious? Why would you think not? I might think that we don't want to proliferate more mamzerim. See, if they stay married and have children, their children are mamzerim. And so you might have thought, you know what? Yeah, you're allowed to get married, right? Mamzer and mamzeret, that's the only people they can, a small group of people they can get married to. But if she's a Sotah, then you know what? Don't drink and get divorced. That way you won't have any more children. We'd rather you didn't have more children. So maybe we should not allow drinking. So that's why the Baraita has to teach us that no, it's permitted, right? Even though, there is a mamzerut problem, but they are allowed to marry, and they are allowed to have children. So therefore, if she is a Sotah, she is allowed to drink. Eshet ger ve'ebed meshuchrar v'ailonit peshita. Ailonit we discussed already, but regarding someone who converted, or they were a slave and now they were freed, so they're fully Jewish, like a convert. So they can become they can make their wives a Sotah, and she drinks. So we ask Peshita. I mean, these people are fully Jewish. Why would they think otherwise? Since in Parashat Sotah it says, "Go tell the children of Israel." I might have thought that only if they are born Jewish and not if they converted. Kamash Malan. That's why it teaches us that, in fact, a convert can also make his wife a Sotah. Now, why don't we say, indeed so? Maybe Bnei Israel should exclude converts. So the answer is, V'amarta ribuyahu. In the continuation of Pasuk, it says, V'amarta, go and tell them. That's an inclusive word to include converts as well, not just born Bnei Israel, but someone who converted. So we finished with the Braita, and now we go back to the original Mishnah that said, Eshet Kohen Shotah. If a Kohen is married to a woman and she's a Sotah, she can drink and prove her innocence. Eshet Kohen Shotah Peshita. We ask, well, of course, why not? This is a regular permitted marriage, right? We're not talking about a Kohen to a divorcee. We're talking about regular Kohen married to a regular woman. So why would you think otherwise? Because in the description of what happens to the Sotah, it says, if she was not seized by force, in other words, she willingly committed adultery, then she is guilty and the curse will come upon her. We can infer from that if she was not seized, if she was seized by force, right? If she was raped, then she would be permitted, and that is true. That is the law for Yisrael, for Eshet Yisrael. If regular Israel is married to a woman and she commits adultery, they're prohibited from each other. But if she's raped, they're permitted to each other. She didn't do anything wrong. However, if she married to a Kohen, wife of a Kohen, if she's raped, even though it was no fault of her own, zero, nevertheless, that's the law. They're prohibited from each other. So this, since if she's married to a Kohen, she is prohibited, I might think that the law of Sotah does not apply to her, because in the paragraph of Sotah, it says that if she is a willing adulterer, then she's prohibited. So that we infer from that if she was unwilling, she was raped, then she would be permitted to her husband. Well, that only applies if he's not a Kohen. So maybe it doesn't apply to a Kohen. Kamash malan. So that's why this Mishnah has to add and say, no, if she is innocent and she drinks and nothing happens, that means nothing ever happened. And so why should she not be able to go back to her Kohen husband when she is innocent? Okay, muteret leba'ala pishita. Regarding the same Kohen, the wife of the Kohen, she's permitted to go back to her husband. Well, we just talked about that. Obviously, she can go back to her husband. She was proven innocent, so she didn't sin. She wasn't raped. She wasn't anything. Peshita, and that obvious. Huna bemitnavena. We're talking about a case where she starts deteriorating a little. Right, we saw before a machloket whether it takes effect immediately or maybe if she has merit, she'll start to deteriorate and then progressively get worse. So mitnavena ha beduka maya. Hold on, if she's starting to deteriorate, you already see some sagging, then that means she's guilty. So she shouldn't be allowed to go back to her husband at all, right, Kohen or not. And so why would you say she can go back? So now your answer is too far the other way. So we answer, she's deteriorating, but not in the normal way of Sotah. Sotah is supposed to, she starts her belly, her thighs start sagging. But for this woman that we're talking about here in this Mishnah is coming to include someone whose limbs, right, maybe her arms, or she's have a headache. It's not the normal way of Sotah. So and so we might have thought, without this phrase in the Mishnah, that maybe this woman did have relations with a man. And the fact that it's not going in a normal order is because she was not committing adultery willingly. She was actually raped. And that's why she is feeling some effect, but it's not happening in the normal way. So if she was married to Israel, that would be fine. She could stay married. But if it's married to a Kohen, then I might have thought that would be prohibited. So therefore the Mishnah says, Kamash Malan, even if a Kohen is married to a woman, and even if she starts seeing some deterioration, but it's not in the normal order of Sotah, it's permitted, right? We don't have to worry about, maybe she was raped or anything like that. She's totally fine. So it comes to include that case. Now, Mishnah goes on and says, Eshet Saris Shotah, wife of a eunuch, still drinks. Pishita, isn't that obvious? They're married, their marriage is permitted, so what's the problem? Because the Pasuk says that we warn her, right? Were you with anyone besides your husband? Besides your husband, and this guy, although they are technically married, they're legally married, he can't have relations with her. And we saw before that there's a law that in order for a Sotah to be valid, Sotah law to be valid, the husband has to have relations with his wife first, before she goes and secludes with someone else. And this man, he can no longer, let's say he was okay before and then became a eunuch, so he can no longer be with his wife. So we might have thought that maybe he can't make her a Sotah anymore. So therefore, Kamash Malan, it teaches us that, in fact, he can, even though currently he's a eunuch. Al Yedeh Kol Arayot Mekanin Peshita. The Mishnah goes on and says, the husband can warn his wife, I don't want you to be alone with your brother, for example, or other Arayot that are close relatives who she's already prohibited to. So we ask Pishita, and that obvious, why not? It's just another man. that would be prohibited to him. Why can't he say, I'm jealous of that person? Because the pasuk says she is defiled twice as a consequence of her becoming or being a sotah, right? And if she's guilty, then she becomes prohibited to her husband, and she also becomes prohibited to the adulterer, right? That's a consequence of adultery. And that's the reason why it says it twice, is to teach us those two consequences. But in this case, where it's her brother, she was always prohibited to her brother. That's just basic incest. And therefore, I would think that the sotah would not apply to her, to a warning and her being secluded with her brother, because she was already prohibited to her brother. And therefore, Kamashman, the Mishnah teaches us that the sotah can apply even if it's to her brother. Now, chutz mina katan, Mishnah goes on and says the sotah ritual does not apply if the husband says, I don't want you to be with that 7-year-old. So why not? Ish amarachamana velo katan. Pasuk says an ish is with her, and that excludes a minor. A minor under 9 cannot have relations. It's not called a legal act. Ve'she'eno ish lemeutemai. Then the Mishnah goes on and also excludes someone who is not a man. So we say, what does that mean, right? Who is not a man that he would warn his wife, don't be with that, what is it talking about? Maybe it's talking about shachuf means someone who's impotent. So he's not able to have normal relations, and so I might say it's kind of like a minor, and therefore it is excluded and cannot be a sotah. So I might say that the problem is that Shemuel said exactly the opposite, that a shachuf can be warned against, and so she can become a sotah. And furthermore, if a kohen is married to a woman and the woman has some kind of intercourse with this shachuf, even if he can't finish, but they can do something, then that's considered enough of adultery that she no longer can have terumah. A wife of a kohen who commits adultery cannot have terumah anymore. So Shemuel said that shachuf can be a sotah. Now that we mentioned Shemuel, we're just going to analyze Shemuel's own opinion. So mekanin al yado pishita. Now we say he can become a sotah as a shachuf. Isn't that obvious? So we went from questioning it to saying yes, it's obvious. Why does Shmuel even have to teach us this? It's just he's a man. Well, because the pasuk says that if an adulterer, a man, should sleep with her shichvat zera, in a way that gives seed, and this guy, since he's impotent, he's not able to give seed. So I might have thought that the sotah does not apply, and therefore Shemuel teaches that it still does apply, because he can. It doesn't have to mean that he can totally finish. If he can do something, then that's considered enough of adultery that to make her a sotah. And furthermore, pasul b'terumah pishita, and also the fact that if a wife of a kohen is with a shachuf, she can no longer eat terumah. Isn't that also obvious? It's still some kind of relation. It's still adultery. Because the pasuk says that he shall not disqualify his offspring, and so his offspring zar'ah. So I might think that you can only disqualify a woman if she is with someone who has zera, and this guy is impotent and he cannot have zera, so maybe it will not disqualify her from having terumah, and therefore Shemuel teaches it still does. Even though he can't finish and have actual seed, nevertheless, he can do enough of an action that would be considered adultery, enough for her to be a sotah and to lose out on eating terumah. Okay, so now back to our original question. When the Mishnah says that sotah does not apply to someone who is not an ish, So who is this person who's not an ish? Maybe it's to exclude a non-Jew. If a woman is secluded with a non-Jew, no sotah there. Is that what Mishnah is talking about? No, it can't be. Rav Hamnuna said that a man can tell his wife, "I don't want you to be with that non-Jew." And if she is, she'll be a sotah. So a non-Jew can be subject to sotah. The woman can be subject to sotah regarding if she secludes with a non-Jew, and also if a kohen is married to a woman and the woman sleeps with a non-Jew, that's considered adultery, and she cannot have terumah. So this can't be talking about a non-Jew in the Mishnah. Now that we mentioned Rav Hamnuna, we're going to analyze both of his laws. Mekanin al yado peshita. Isn't it obvious that regarding a Gentile that this would be a sotah? Again, here we went from saying maybe it's not a sotah at all to saying it's obvious. Rav had to teach us this, since it says the word nitmea twice, and the reason why it's twice is because if a woman is with some other man, she becomes prohibited 2 times. Number 1, to her husband, and also to the adulterer. She's never allowed to marry that adulterer. But in this case, she was already prohibited from this guy because he's not Jewish. And so therefore I might think that the Sotah law will not apply in this case, because there's no new second prohibition to the adulterer. And therefore Rav Hamnuna teaches that, no, nevertheless, she can be a Sotah in such a case. And if a woman is married, if a kohen is married to a woman who is then with a non-Jew, she loses out on terumah. Isn't that also obvious? Why do Rav Hamnuna have to say that? This pasuk teaches that a bat kohen, while she is in her father's house, she can eat terumah, but should she marry, and the word tihiyeh, havaya, means with proper marriage, kiddushin nisuin. If she marries a zar, so in the simple reading, it means that she marries a non-kohen. Then since she's married to a Yisrael, so she can no longer eat terumah. Good. So Rav Hamnuna said, only if she marries officially someone who's not a Kohen, then she loses out on eating terumah. But if she happens to be with a non-Jew, has relations with a non-Jew, but it's not possible to do kiddushin with a non-Jew, it is not valid, then that would not make her disqualified to eat terumah. That's what I might have thought. And that's why the Rav Hamnuna up here has to teach me that, no, in fact, if a woman is with a non-Jew, here where she's married to a Kohen, and then she commits adultery with a non-Jew, that in fact makes her pasul for terumah. He had to teach us this, because because I might have thought otherwise from this Havaya, and therefore he teaches us that in fact the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? Tamar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Yishmael minayin lenochri ve'eved shabo al kohenet ve'al leviya ve'al bat Yisrael shepisaluha shene'emar ubat kohen tiyeh almana ugrusha mi sheyesh lo almanut ve'gerushin ba yasu nochri ve'eved she'en lo almanut ve'gerushin ba. Rabbi Yochanan learns that a non-Jew or a slave that have relations with anyone, right, Bat Kohen, Bat Levi, or Bat Yisrael, who are married to a Kohen. So a Kohen is married to anyone, and then she has relations with a non-Jew. She cannot have terumah anymore. That is considered an act of adultery enough for this purpose. How does he know that? Because the pasuk, this is the very next pasuk after the one we quoted before, that says a bat kohen, if she should marry someone and then get divorced, or she is widowed and she doesn't have children and she goes back to her father's house, then she can eat terumah once again. So what do we learn from that? That someone who can be an almana or a megureshet, then she goes, if she's married, that means it has to be a proper marriage first. It has to be Kiddushin, if there can be Gerushin. So if she is with someone who has Kiddushin, and then she gets divorced, then she's allowed to go back to her father's house. But if she instead goes and has relations with a non-Jew or a slave, where there is no possibility of Gerushin, because no possibility of Kiddushin for those people, then she cannot go back to her father's house and continue to eat terumah. Just like she can't go back to her father's house, so too, if she's married to a Kohen and then commits adultery with a non-Jew, she cannot eat terumah anymore. That is like adultery, and makes her prohibited for terumah, because she did that while she's married to a Kohen. So that's Rabbi Yochanan's source, and from here we derive that if a man tells a woman that the laws for a non-Jew are the same. If a man tells a woman, I don't want to be with that non-Jew, and she does, she is a Sotah. And also if she is with that man and she's married to a Kohen, she has to stop eating terumah. And therefore, when it says in the Mishnah, to not a man, it's not referring to a non-Jew either. So what is that clause in the Mishnah referring to when it says someone who is not an ish, is not a Sotah? This is the final answer. It's referring to an animal. If a man tells his wife, I don't want you to be with that dog, and then she goes and secludes with him, that's not called Sotah. Why? Because bestiality is not considered adultery. It's not considered a sexual act, even though bestiality actually is listed in the section of Adayot, and it is a terrible thing and disgusting and all that. Nevertheless, because it's not a sexual act, so it's not considered adultery. In other words, if you have a man and a woman and they're married, and let's say she commits bestiality, so while that's a terrible sin, she doesn't have to actually get divorced because of it. There's lots of terrible sins. If she's a serial murderer, that's also a terrible thing, and she'll get her punishment for that, but she doesn't have to get divorced, right? Divorce is only required by sins that affect their marriage, like adultery, and because that's not considered a sexual act, it's not considered adultery. It's not called zinut regarding behemah. And so that's the reason why in the Mishnah it says, and if he warns her against being with someone who's not a human, an animal, that does not enter under the law of Sotah. Amar leRava mipar zakiya leRav Asher menahane milta damur banan en zinut bibhema. Now we ask to Rav Asher, what's the source that it's not called zinut if someone's with an animal? Dichtiv lo tavi etnan zona umechir kel. Pasuk in Devarim says one's not allowed to bring the hire of a harlot or the price of a dog into the Mishkan. You cannot use it to buy a sacrifice. Now, the Peshat is very different from the way that we're going to learn the Midrash. The Peshat is talking about an anti-pagan rite. In pagan temples, they used to have zonot there, and so people would come and pay the zonot for men would come and pay for the zonot for their services. That's etnan zonah. That money you cannot use for sacrifices. It's unholy money, and you can't mix that. It's bad anyway. Certainly even worse to mix it with something sacred, because that's precisely what they did in pagan temples. In addition, mechir keleb. This is referring to male prostitutes that men would come and pay. So mechir kelev is also prohibited, and that money also cannot. So that's what's talking about zonah and kelev. That's the simple reading. However, the Midrash is going to read it differently. V'tanya etnan kelev umechir zonah mutarin shene'emar gam shenehem shenayim velo arba'a. So we learn that the only two things that are prohibited are etnan zonah. That would be the price for hiring a zonah. If one pays, let's say, with an animal, one pays to be with the zonah with an animal, that's etnan zonah. That animal cannot be used. And mechir kelev is the payment to purchase a dog for a different reason it was not permitted. So that's the literal, that's those two things which are not permitted. But now if we switch around the words, right, and we take etnan with kelev and zonah, and we take etnan with kelev and mechir with zonah, so that creates two other scenarios which that money or animal is permitted to use, because it says gam shenehem in the rest of the pasuk, meaning only two, these two, right, literally, and not these other two. What are the other two? Etnan kelev, if one would pay a prostitute with a sheep, so that she will cohabit with a dog, that animal would be permitted. Not that the act is permitted, but that, in other words, is not called a sexual act. It's not zinut, and therefore it's permitted. It's only zinut if it's with humans, and so that's why etnan zonah is not allowed. But etnan kelev, right, a payment for her to be with a dog, is that sheep that you pay would be permitted. So this is the proof that being with that bestiality is not considered zinut. And the other item is mechir zonah. That refers to someone who sells a zonah that he owns as a maidservant, and so that money or animal that he would get as payment for selling that zonah, that also is permitted, right? That's not included because it only says etnan zonah mechir kelev. It does not say the other way around, etnan kelev or mechir zonah. So while those are all the other problematic things, but the money itself was not used for human relations, and therefore can be used, that the money or the animal that was given for it can be used as a sacrifice. The only thing that would be prohibited, in addition for payment for selling dogs, separate matter, is the etnan zonah, is the payment actual for human prostitution. So we see from here that the paying someone for being with a keleb is not considered zinut. That's the source. Ve'ela shichvat zera lamali. Okay, so we finished that section, and now we understand. It says, and someone who's not an ish, that's referring to animal. If warning a woman not to be secluded with an animal, that's not called sotah. But now we go back, and since beforehand Shemuel said that shachuf, someone who's impotent, he can be the object of sotah. If a husband says, "I don't want you to be with that shachuf," that does work. So now we ask, "Ve'ela shichvat zera lamali." When the pasuk says, "V'shachav ish oto shichvat zera," what does that mean? Right? The problem in that pasuk is a man, an adulterer, came and slept with her shichvat zera. So why do we need those words if sotah applies, even if the adulterer is a shachuf lamali? And the answer is, this Baraita says it has to be a man capable of shichvat zera, and that excludes something else. Well, what is something else? My davar acher. I guess the Baraita wants to use clean language, but clean language is also ambiguous language. What does it mean? Amarav sheshat perat l'shikinela shelo kedarka. Oh, this is excluding if a man told his wife, "I don't want you to be secluded with that man for the purpose of atypical intercourse," meaning anal, right? And so he specified only that. That doesn't work. That would not be called a sotah. And that's why shichvat zera means the normal way of relations, and not if it's abnormal. But Rava rejects that, and because he proves from the phrase mishkeve isha regarding homosexuality, it says that's not allowed, like the cohabitations in plural of a woman, which we learn from there that there are two ways of cohabitation with a woman, regular and irregular, and both of them are called cohabitation. So therefore, if a man says to his wife, "I don't want you to be with that man in a abnormal manner," well, that's also relation. So there's no reason to exclude that from being a sotah. So rather, Rava says that the word shichvat zera comes to exclude if the man says, "I don't want you to be secluded with that man for by way of limbs, meaning without penetration, just rubbing limbs, and that I don't want that, and that does not work. That will not be a sotah because there was no actual act of intercourse there. Abaye says that no one would ever think that would be a problem of sotah. It's a problem, but not of sotah, because just being rubbing limbs is forbidden because it's licentious behavior, but it's not prohibited as adultery. You don't call that such a person an adulterer, such that they have to get divorced and other punishments of adultery. So that can't be it either. That's kind of too lenient. We had too strict, too lenient. So we really get fine-tuning it here. Abaye says this comes to include a man who says to his wife, I'd want you not to be screwed with that man for the purpose of genital contact. Just contact without penetration. And that would, so that's what Shechvat Zera says. No, it has to be some penetration with the possibility of Shechvat Zera, but Nishika itself only is not sufficient. So we say, okay, that's fine. That's a good answer, according to the opinion that says ha'ara'ah. Ha'ara'ah means the first stage of intercourse. It's not clear what that is. One opinion says that means the initial penetration. If so, then nishika only is not considered an act, and that's why, yes, it makes sense that there would not be a sotah. So that's why the pasuk says not nishika, has to be shechvat zera, at least the beginning of penetration, not just contact. That would be a good answer. But the other opinion that says the first stage actually is just genital contact, and that is considered an act there. If so, then that would be prohibited, and that would be considered adultery, and so it should not be excluded. So what do you say about that? So the answer is we'll go back to the previous answer. It's when he warned her and said don't have just physical contact of limbs. And before we said, well, obviously that's not, if there's no penetration, that's not going to be adultery. Why do I even need to say that? And so the answer is we need to say that because we might have thought that it depends on what the husband thinks. And he is particular. He really doesn't want his wife to even have contact, just skin contact with this guy. And since he really cares about that a lot, and he warns her and says, this is going to be grounds for divorce, I might have thought that, yes, that can make her a sotah. And that's why the Torah has to come and say, listen, only shechvat zera, only if it's an actual sexual act that has the possibility of shechvat zera, even if he's a shachuf and there is an actual zera, that would still be a sotah. But if it's no penetration and just limbs, then that is not, we use an objective standard, not a particular husband's standard, and therefore that case would not be a sotah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.